Have you ever stood on a jetway, looked out through that small oval window, and watched the ground crew pumping fuel into the wing of the aircraft you are about to board? Not into the belly, not into some tank hidden beneath your seat, into the wing itself. Most people notice it. Almost nobody stops to ask why. Today, we are breaking down exactly why airplane fuel lives inside the wings. And after this video, you will never look at a parked aircraft the same way again. Because the answer is not just engineering. It is one of the most elegant solutions in the history of aviation. A problem hidden inside a problem, solved by the one thing nobody expected. Let us start with the number that makes this feel completely insane. A fully loaded Boeing 747 carries roughly 180,000 kilograms of jet fuel before a single passenger has touched their seat. That is the combined weight of approximately 40 full-grown African elephants. And a massive portion of that weight is not sitting beneath you in the cargo hold. It is not tucked behind the cockpit. It is not stored in reinforced tanks running along the belly of the fuselage. It is suspended in the wings, stretching out on either side of the aircraft, tens of meters above the tarmac. When most people first hear that, the reaction is immediate. That cannot be right. Surely the fuel belongs in the body of the plane, safe, central, protected, away from the engines, away from turbulence, away from anything that could go wrong, tucked into the thick armored belly where nothing can reach it. That instinct makes complete sense, and it is completely wrong. But before we get into why, let us talk about where this idea came from. Because storing fuel in the wings was not always the obvious choice. The Wright Flyer at Kitty Hawk in 1903 carried its tiny fuel supply in a simple gravity-fed tank mounted near the engine. There was barely enough fuel for 12 seconds of flight. The concept of structural fuel storage simply did not exist. Early biplanes and wartime aircraft of the 1910s and the 1920s used small tanks positioned wherever they could fit, sometimes in the fuselage, sometimes between the wings. The wings themselves were thin, fabric-covered structures. There was nothing inside them worth filling. As aircraft grew larger through the 1930s and 1940s, engineers began placing tanks inside wings, not because of some grand structural theory, but because the wings were getting bigger and the space was simply there. It was a practical decision first. The deeper structural reasons emerged later, as engineers began precisely measuring what actually happens to a wing during flight. And what they measured changed everything. To understand why, stop thinking about what a wing looks like from the outside and start thinking about what it experiences from the inside the moment a fully loaded Airbus A380 lifts off the runway at Dubai International Airport. At the moment of rotation, when the nose rises and the wheels leave the ground, the wings are not passive surfaces along for the ride. They are generating lift equal to the entire weight of the aircraft. 575 metric tons of upward force, all of it anchored at the points where the wings attach to the fuselage. That is the equivalent of a fully loaded freight train being yanked upward by two structures bolted to the sides of a tube. Now think carefully about what that does to the wing itself. Picture holding a long metal rod horizontally with both hands placed together at the center. Now imagine someone hanging a heavy bag from each end and letting it drop. The rod bends. The center stays fixed where your hands are. The ends curve downward under the weight. The further out the weight is placed, the more violently the rod wants to bend. Now flip that image completely. In flight, the force is not pulling the wingtips down. Lift is pulling the wingtips up, while the weight of the fuselage, the passengers, the cargo, and the engines pulls the center down. The wing curves upward. On a Boeing 787 Dreamliner during cruise, The wingtips sit nearly 3.5 meters higher than they do on the ground. You can see this from a window seat during climb if you watch the wingtip carefully. The wing that looked flat and rigid on the tarmac is visibly alive, bending toward the sky. That bending is not a malfunction. It is engineered, but it comes at a cost. The engineering term is bending moment. It is one of the most destructive forces an airframe manages across a long-haul flight. Every degree of flex, every meter of upward curve at the wingtip, places enormous stress on the internal structure. The spars run lengthwise, the ribs run perpendicular, the skin panels hold everything together. All of it fights that bending moment every minute of the flight. Here is where everything changes. Here is the part that completely flips the way you think about this. Fuel stored inside the wing does not ride along passively. It actively fights that bending force. As the wing generates lift and curves upward, the weight of the fuel inside it pushes back down. The fuel acts as a counterweight spread along the wing's internal length, directly resisting the bending moment created by aerodynamic forces. Engineers call this wing bending relief, and it is the primary structural reason fuel lives in the wings. Without that fuel weight working against the bend, wings would need to be built dramatically differently. Stronger spars, thicker load-bearing skins, heavier internal ribs reinforced along the entire span. All of that additional structure adds weight. And additional weight means the aircraft needs more lift, which demands more thrust, which burns more fuel, which requires carrying more fuel to begin with. It becomes a brutal engineering spiral with no clean exit. Placing the fuel inside the wing breaks that spiral elegantly. The fuel is weight the aircraft must carry regardless. So engineers positioned it precisely where that weight performs the most structural work. The fuel is not just a passenger on the flight. It is holding the wing together from the inside. Now here is where it gets even more fascinating, because the fuel does not simply sit there quietly. A modern commercial aircraft carries fuel across multiple tanks, managed by a dedicated system working continuously throughout the flight. A Boeing 777 carries fuel in a left wing main tank, a right wing main tank, and a center tank running through the base of the fuselage where the wings meet the body. The sequence in which those tanks drain is not random. The flight management system and fuel control system work together from engine start to engine shutdown, deciding which tank feeds the engines, at what rate, and in what precise order. This is not just about keeping the engines running. It is about balance. It is about structure. It is about the physics of a 250-ton aircraft changing in real time at 37,000 feet. Center tanks are typically burned first, preserving fuel in the wing tanks longer. This keeps bending relief active during the highest stress phases of the flight, protecting the structure during climb and the long initial hours of cruise when the aircraft is at its heaviest. But there is another layer that goes deeper than structure. As the aircraft burns fuel across a 12-hour flight from London Heathrow to Singapore Changi, its center of gravity shifts constantly. Burn more from the forward tanks and the nose gets lighter. Burn more from the rear and the tail gets lighter. An aircraft flying outside its center of gravity limits is an aircraft in serious danger. The fuel system monitors balance continuously, and on some modern jets, actively transfers fuel between tanks mid-flight purely to reposition weight, not to feed the engines. On the Airbus A380, fuel is pumped rearward into the tail tank during cruise to shift the center of gravity backward slightly. This reduces the load the horizontal stabilizer must carry to keep the aircraft flying level, which reduces drag, which improves fuel efficiency across the entire flight. The fuel being moved is not being consumed. It is being used as precision ballast at 39,000 feet. The fuel is not cargo. It is a dynamic, continuously managed structural and aerodynamic tool. And consider the scale of what disappears across a long flight. A Boeing 747 at takeoff weighs close to 412,000 kilograms. 12 hours later on final approach, it might weigh closer to 280,000 kilograms. More than 130,000 kilograms of fuel converted into thrust, heat, and forward motion across the sky. The aircraft that touches down is fundamentally different in weight, balance, and structural load from the aircraft that departed. Every kilogram of that transformation was managed by the fuel system, one tank at a time, across every hour of the flight. That is not storage. That is one of the most sophisticated weight management systems ever built into a flying machine. So the next time you sit in a window seat and look out at that wing, the one that appears smooth and solid and unremarkable from the outside, understand what you are actually seeing. You are looking at a pressurized structural fuel tank carrying tens of thousands of kilograms of jet fuel. You are looking at a surface bending visibly upward under loads that would eventually destroy it without that fuel weight pushing back from the inside. You are looking at a system being actively drained, balanced, and repositioned in real time by computers monitoring every kilogram across every tank on the aircraft. It is not just a wing. It never was. The wing is a fuel tank. The fuel is a structural component. The weight is performing engineering work. And the entire system is alive and changing from the moment the brakes release on the runway to the moment the spoilers deploy on landing. Every flight you have ever taken, that process was happening 1 meter outside your window the entire time. And now, I'm curious. If the fuel is constantly shifting and the aircraft is getting lighter by the hour, how does a pilot actually know the aircraft is still balanced when hundreds of passengers suddenly stand up at the same time? Subscribe, and we will break that down next.